Imagine Rome, the 2nd century AD. On the throne sits a philosopher, a sage, a model of stoicism, a man whose books on life and virtue are still quoted in universities today. This is Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, a symbol of prudence and moral purity. But here's the paradox. Standing next to this icon of morality is a woman, his wife, Empress Faustina. And it is she who is the subject of the dirtiest, most scandalous rumors in the history of Rome. It was said that she held secret orgies with gladiators, that her lovers died mysterious deaths, and that a secret club of debauchery operated in the heart of the imperial palace, where only the select few from the Roman elite were allowed to enter. Historians have been arguing for centuries about what is true and what is exaggerated gossip. But one thing is clear. Her image has become so closely associated with the legend of debauchery that even her husband's virtuous philosophical treatises could not overshadow it. So who was Faustina? A victim of Roman gossip? Or a woman who truly turned the palace into an arena of passions and dangerous games? In official history, Faustina bore the honorary title of Faustina Augusta. She came from the most noble Antonine family and was married to the man who was called the last good emperor, Marcus Aurelius. On coin, she was depicted as the goddess of fertility, the mother of the empire, and a symbol of the hearth and home. For the common people, she was the embodiment of feminine virtue, a loving wife, mother of many children, and quiet guardian of the home. But Rome was never a city of peace and quiet. It was a capital where rumors spread faster than legions. And very soon, whispers began to circulate among the nobility. The empress had another life. Imagine a luxurious banquet in a palace. On the tables are silver dishes, rare wines, and exotic delicacies. But the main pleasures begin not at the feasts, but afterwards. In closed halls, where ordinary senators have no access. There, it was said, the empress herself chose men, young soldiers, gladiators, even slaves, and arranged entertainment that made even the most hardened patricians dizzy. For the Romans, this was unheard of. The emperor's wife, mother of the future heir, instead of being an example of modesty, allegedly indulged in carnal pleasures in front of her courtiers. But here's what's important. Sources are silent on whether Marcus Aurelius condemned her. And this further fueled interest. After all, the philosopher, author of Meditations, who taught the whole world the path of virtue, remained silent about what was happening right in his own home. In Rome, rumors ruled everything. Sometimes they killed faster than poison in a cup. And there were too many rumors surrounding Faustina. Senators whispered in private conversations. The empress did not simply cheat on her husband. She made infidelity part of court culture. In a small circle of nobles, there was talk of peculiar, debauched games. These were secret gatherings where noble ladies and men exchanged roles, partners, and masks. Imagine a huge hall in the imperial palace, lit by hundreds of oil lamps. Heavy purple curtains cover the windows so that no prying eyes can see inside. The music of flutes and drums drowns out everything outside. And in this closed world, a performance begins that will never make it into the official chronicles. Rumors claim that Faustina chose not only members of the nobility for her games, but also gladiators, the most handsome, the strongest, those whom the public idolized in the arena. For the Romans, a gladiator was almost like a modern rock star, dangerous, daring, full of animal strength, and the thought that the empress shared her bed with such men both horrified and excited the public's imagination. But the legends did not end there. More sinister stories claimed that anyone who became Faustina's lover soon died. Whether these were unfortunate accidents or silent eliminations, suspicion fell on the empress. Thus was born the myth of a woman whose passion brought death. And here the question arises. If this is all fiction, who benefited from it? Marcus Aurelius's rivals, the Roman patricians, dissatisfied with his philosophical coldness. Or perhaps these were tales of the common people, who always wanted to believe that things behind the palace walls were more exciting than any theatrical performance. Now imagine, You are an ordinary Roman citizen. You are standing in a crowd in the Forum, and you hear your neighbor whispering that yesterday the Empress allegedly spent the night with a gladiator, and today that man is dead. The rumor instantly becomes truth. This is how legends were built that have survived the centuries. Why did Faustina need all these secret games? Historians still argue about this. Some see her as a woman driven solely by passion. Others see her as a cunning schemer who used her love affairs as a tool of power. But let's try to look at it more broadly. Faustina grew up surrounded by luxury. She was the daughter of Emperor Antoninus Pius, which meant that from childhood she knew that everything around her belonged to her. While ordinary Roman women fought for the right to have a say in their families, Faustina saw from an early age that her destiny was not simply to be a wife, but to become a symbol of the dynasty. Imagine a girl who is not yet 18 years old and is already being married off to a future philosopher on the throne. Her marriage to Marcus Aurelius was not only a personal union, but also a political one. There was no room in it for youthful fantasies of romance. And here the first crack appears: a marriage of convenience versus the desire to live according to one's heart. Rumors of gladiators and orgies can be interpreted as Faustina's response to this golden marriage cage. If life is predetermined, where can one find freedom? Perhaps in forbidden pleasures. But there was another version. Faustina could use her intimate connections as a way to influence political circles. Imagine the emperor's wife, who knows all the senators' weaknesses, their secret desires, their vices. Isn't that a powerful weapon? There is evidence that Marcus Aurelius, despite his image as a sage and philosopher, was deeply dependent on his wife's opinion. And this opens up a new perspective. Perhaps Faustina was not simply seeking pleasure, but was building a network of influence around herself in which even the emperor was not always in control. Now think about this. Could she have been both a victim of circumstances and a manipulator? A woman who was locked in a golden cage but decided to dictate the rules of the game herself? Marcus Aurelius. For us, he is the image of a wise emperor, the author of Meditations, a Stoic philosopher, a man who knew how to keep a cool head even in the chaos of war. But here's the question. What did this philosopher do when all of Rome was whispering about his wife? Sources paint a paradoxical picture. On the one hand, Marcus Aurelius left behind writings about patience, humility, and fortitude. He seemed to be teaching himself, do not be angry, do not condemn. Remember that everything is part of the great order of the universe. But how can this philosophy be applied when it comes to one's own wife, to rumors that call into question the honor of the dynasty? Imagine nights in the palace. The philosopher-emperor sits over a scroll, writing his famous thoughts on virtue. And at the same time, he knows that behind the walls, people are whispering that Faustina is cheating on him with a gladiator or a senator. What did he feel? Humility? Pain? Or perhaps cold indifference, because the duty of a ruler is greater than personal suffering? There are theories that Marcus Aurelius knew everything but turned a blind eye. For him, the main thing was to preserve the dynasty and power. He understood that a scandal surrounding the empress could destroy the trust of the army, the Senate, and the people, and so he chose silence. But there is another hypothesis. Some chroniclers wrote that Marcus Aurelius not only knew about it, but also approved of it. It sounds crazy, but let's remember his philosophy. A Stoic must accept life as it is. Perhaps for Marcus, Faustina's infidelity was not a personal tragedy, but an inevitable part of human weakness. The greatest philosopher on the throne of Rome, whose works will be studied for centuries, sits next to his wife, whom the whole city calls a slut. And he remains silent. He remains silent because he understands that history is not about personal feelings, but about preserving power, the army, and the state. And in this silence, perhaps, there is more drama than in any rumors. Faustina's rumors and secret games did not remain without consequences. In Rome, as in any other empire, Power and reputation were closely linked to family honor. Every step the empress took affected her children, the senators, and the entire palace. Imagine, you are the daughter of a senator and your mother or aunt is involved in debauched games at the imperial court. Your family loses its honor. Marriage to a promising partner becomes impossible. Political ambitions are ruined. And all this just because the emperor's wife decided to satisfy her desires. Even Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher, could not completely protect his children from the consequences of rumors. The future emperor Commodus grew up in an atmosphere of intrigue, gossip, and whispering. It is not difficult to see that many traits of his cruel character, his love of cruelty, and his desire for theatrical spectacles may have originated in the atmosphere in which he was raised, a palace where power and pleasure were intertwined in a deadly way. But the consequences affected more than just the family. Rumors about Faustina were used by political opponents to discredit Marcus Aurelius and his allies. Senators dissatisfied with the philosopher-emperor eagerly seized upon every word, exaggerating stories of orgies and the deaths of lovers. For them, it was a tool of pressure. If the empress violated norms, then the philosopher-emperor was weak. For centuries, we have read about Faustina either as the saintly mother of an emperor or as a promiscuous woman. But in reality, things were more complicated. She was a symbol of passion, an instrument of power, part of political games, and perhaps a victim of circumstances. And if you think this is ancient drama, you are mistaken. Systems of power and the influence of women through intimate relationships continued to exist later on. Sometimes it was a means of survival, sometimes a tool of control, and sometimes a game played with society itself. Roman culture was both strict and extremely inventive in justifying double standards. Women were expected to be modest and keepers of the hearth, while men could get away with practically anything, from numerous mistresses to public orgies. Faustina found herself trapped by these expectations. On the one hand, she was an empress, a symbol of power and perfection. On the other hand, any rumor about her passions immediately became a cause for discussion and scandal. Let's imagine, you are a courtier or senator. Your every move is monitored, your every word is evaluated, and suddenly you hear that the emperor's wife has organized a private banquet with gladiators. Your thoughts, how should I react? How can I save face in front of society? The Romans both admired her courage and condemned her. For men, Faustina's palace entertainment may have been a game, but for women, it was a tool of pressure and a threat to their family honor. This double standard of Roman morality shaped the legend of Faustina. On the one hand, she was seen as a promiscuous woman, and on the other, as a symbol of power that could manipulate even a philosopher on the throne. After Faustina's death, much remained behind the palace walls. But the influence of her life and rumors spread to subsequent generations. Her son, Commodus, grew up in an atmosphere of intrigue, rumors, and sexual games at court. His cruelty and love of theatrical violence may have been a reflection of the environment in which he was raised. If a child sees that power and pleasure are inextricably intertwined, where life and death can depend on the whims of the empress, how can this not leave a mark on the psyche? This is how dynasties are formed, where personal passions rule politics and rumors become a tool of control. Faustina showed that even an ideal family and a philosophical husband cannot guarantee protection from human nature and the power of rumors. Her life became a lesson in how power and passion intertwine, and how easily moral norms can be subordinated to personal will and ambition. Faustina's story is more than just gossip about debauchery. It is an example of how power, authority, and human passions can influence entire generations. Imagine a world where women can use their charisma and influence as a tool of power, where a philosopher on the throne remains silent, accepting the complexity of life, where rumors and intrigue become part of politics. And most importantly, it is a story about how easily historical memory separates truth from myth, how the image of a woman can become a symbol of everything that suits legends. What do you think? Are these mechanisms repeated in the modern world? Are power, influence, and secret information used to manipulate society, leaving order and virtue behind the facade? Faustina lives in legend, but the lesson of her life is still relevant today. Power and passion, silence and rumors, all these are eternal tools that shape history and people's destinies.